What's one thing you have no doubt about?
One thing I have no doubt about is that at some point we all gonna leave this earth,
Okay.
and we have to do something significant with the time that we have here.
Love that. Love that.
I know it's God's favor for the position I'm in. And all them losses took the toll, so now I savor my wins. I work with niggas I looked up to, now they hate on my pen. And I can't explain these transitions and these phases I'm in.
So before we get started, we got to shout out our Black-owned brand of the day. And today happens to be with me, Dr. Peter Watts.
What's up? I'm glad to be here. My name is Dr. Peter Watts. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Watts of Power Foundation. We have an initiative called the Village Initiative, which is a 2-year residency program to recruit, retain, sustain Black male educators to become public school teachers right here in our city in Los Angeles. We have a movement right here. It's called Multiply to 2%, because if you don't know, there are only 2% of Black men in the public teaching profession. And so we don't want to just add more Black men to the teaching profession, but we want to multiply them in the teaching profession, because if we have more Black men in teaching, we'll have more success with Black and brown students going to college and not dropping out of high school. And so thank you for being a part of this journey and listening to this podcast. You can catch me on social media, on our social media handles, Instagram and Twitter and TikTok, all of the socials at Watts of _power, Watts of _power. And then if you want to get in contact with us, hit us up on our website at wattsofpowerfoundation.org. That's wattsofpowerfoundation.org. Go on our website, see all the programs, see all the videos, and contact us. Again, my name is Dr. Peter Watts, CEO and co-founder of the Watts of Power. Peace.
You heard it. Dr. Peter Watts, Watts of Power Foundation. Stay tuned. Enjoy the episode. The thing you said you have no doubt about is that we're going to leave this earth and we have to do something significant while we're here. What's your take on that and kind of expand on that thought?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has a birth date and an expiration date. And, yesterday I laid my uncle to rest. There was a memorial service that we had for him. And oftentimes when you are a part of these celebrations of life, you're very reflective. And so my reflection over the past, day or so has been about our birth date and our expiration date, and realizing when you go to a cemetery, right, you see the time that they were born, the time that they left this earth, and in between, you see this dash. And all that people know from the tombstone is birth and death, and then there's that dash.
Yeah.
And that dash is all of the things in life that you did, right? And so oftentimes as I'm reflecting, it's like, how do you make that dash in your life count?
Yeah.
Right? And so what I have no doubt about is that there is a birth date, there is an expiration date, but in between those birth and expiration, that dash, what are you going to do with that dash?
Yeah. Well, first off, my condolences, prayers to the family.
For sure.
And, that dash, what is that for you right now? What is your purpose here on this earth, and how are you feel like you are, filling the gap between your birth and, expiration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we oftentimes think about, like, what's my purpose in life? What am I called to do?
Yeah.
I'm 51 years old, and I finally feel like at this point in my life, I actually know what it is that I've been called to do.
Yeah.
There have been hints of it all throughout my life, from a kid in school, and then in college as a young adult, being a young parent and all that good stuff. But I think and believe that my purpose in life is to invest in the next generation. But as Howard Thurman would say in one of his sermons and in a book that I read about him, is that I do what makes me come alive. He says, do what makes you come alive. When you try to figure out what your purpose is in life, what you're supposed to be doing, what did God call you to do? He said, do what makes you come alive. He says, what the world needs is people who have come alive. And so what makes me come alive currently is the work I do with our nonprofit at the Watts of Power. We have an initiative called Teacher Village, or the Village Initiative, I should say.
Yeah.
And this initiative focuses on creating Black male teachers who become fully credentialed and highly effective in the classroom, and who become homeowners in the neighborhoods where they teach. So that's what makes me come alive.
Yeah.
Investing in the next generation of educators who would be teaching my grandkids,
Yeah.
for that matter.
Yeah. And that's big, right? That's think about the impact in the educational system. And you hear it all the time, the talks about, the system, the systematic approach, systemic racism, just everything, regarding the Black community specifically. What's the importance of building up these Black teachers specifically in LA County? Because I mean, if I'm not mistaken, we have about 12% of the students makeup is African American men and women, and about how many percent would you say is the teacher population?
Probably about 8% teacher population. With Black male teachers, though, it's like 2%.
2%,
right?
Yeah.
And so it's important when we think about a city like Los Angeles in a school district like LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District, being the second largest school district in the nation, only second to New York. And we oftentimes look at LA and Black people in LA and Black students in LA in our public schools, saying that there aren't a lot of us. Statistically, when you look at the percentages, compared to say Atlanta and Georgia or some of those panhandle states or whatever. But when you look at how Black students and Black families are spread throughout LA County in the schools that they're in, you come to realize that there are 50,000 students in LAUSD that are Black. And if they were their own school district, they would probably in California, they'll be the 7th to 11th largest school district in the state of California. So the issue is not, are there enough Black students? The issue is, are there enough Black teachers that would represent the students in our district? And so that's the problem. That's the issue that we are trying to address in the work that we do, is to increase the diversity of educators in the teaching workforce in California, and particularly in LA, and getting even more focused on the Black male representation.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about, multiplying the 2%, right?
That's what we're talking about, multiplying the 2%, which speaks to the national average of Black public school teachers that are male. There are only 2% of Black men in teaching right now. And so our organization and our movement, the way in which we go about building power and building community and doing policy change is by increasing the number of Black men in teaching by multiplying the 2%. So we're really saying we don't want to just add more teachers to the profession. We want to multiply it. It needs to be exponential.
Gotcha. Yeah. 2 plus 3 and 2 times 3 is
totally different, right?
Yeah. So, being from LA, right? Let's talk about going back to go forward, right? So, where do you come from? What's kind of your upbringing?
So I'm from LA, born and raised, South Central, all of LA. So when I say I'm from LA, I'm from the real part of LA, right? Not the Valley, not Pasadena, not Arcadia, like LA.
Okay.
And so but I grew up in LA, all around, the greater parts of LA, Inglewood, South LA, Compton, different parts, and went to public school for elementary and middle school. And then went to a parochial high school in Watts called Verbum Day, and then went to the State College at Cal State Dominguez Hills, which is in the city of Carson, right next in between Long Beach and Compton. And so I'm LA through and through, born and raised and stayed. Oftentimes thought about moving out of LA to another state like Georgia or like Memphis, where my family's from. But I love the weather, I love the people, and this is where my roots are.
That's what's up. And so, does that play into a fact of, of course, where you're from and what you want to do in the community where you are from? Yeah.
So, you always want to think about, like, how do I give back to the community that gave so much to me? What legacy do I want to leave behind when I expire, when I leave this place? And so being able to invest in a community that invested in me, that built me up, that gave me all the opportunities and experiences that I needed to become a functioning member of society. I do want to give back to my community, and the way I do that is through this work by raising up the next generation of leaders who want to give back to their community. And so when we think about the work that we do, we're always going around recruiting young Black men who are interested or who would be interested in the education profession and teaching and in education just in general, and really looking for young men that grew up in this city. They may have moved away, they may have gone to HBCU, they may be at Morehouse, and they may be at FAMU or whatever the case may be, but we want to show up and say, hey, would you want to come back to your city, to your community, and give back to the next generation? And so that's just again, wash and repeat.
Okay. So you talk about recruiting, right? And when we're recruiting and for anybody, for our business, our organization, our teams, our staff, what's the vetting process that goes into these fellows? 'Cause I'm sure there's some type of application that they have to fill out, and what are the qualifications that they need to meet in order to join the Teacher Village?
Yeah, there are core values that we live by as an organization. Those same core values we look for in young men who we are interviewing and recruiting. And some of those core values are: do you want to invest in the community you were raised in? Do you want to invest in Black and brown children? Do you want a career in education? Are you interested in home ownership? Are you a caring educator? Like, it's like all of these different types of characteristics that we look for in young men as we are vetting and interviewing and looking at applications for that matter. And so at the end of the day, we're looking for young men, and I say young, but we're looking for men who want to have a career in education and see themselves as a teacher and a long-time educator. Doesn't mean that they have to be in a classroom for 30 years, but we want them to be in the education sector, whether they start as a teacher and they move into administration, they move into policy, they move into school board leadership, even if they want to be a superintendent. We just want them to start in the classroom so that they understand the experiences that students and teachers have if they go off to do other things and the impact that their decisions make in the classroom.
Yeah. And, what is the value that they get? Yes, they get to become teachers, when they finish the process. But what's also the full package that you offer to them as teachers? Because we also know that, not just being, Black men in the teaching space, but we are Black men in this world. And so how do you, combat those different obstacles and stuff that that play into being available for students?
Yeah, so when we think about what the value proposition, as we call it in our work, the value proposition that we have for folks who are interested in our program is one, a community of support for them as they are going into the profession, and support to help them stay in the profession. So when we talk about recruiting, we're not just talking about recruiting so that they turn over and burn out and leave for us to start recruiting again. We're talking about recruiting, sustaining, and retaining in this profession. And so we want them to enter in a healthy way. And so we provide what we call wraparound supports, much like how social services provide wraparound supports for vulnerable students and families. We provide these wraparound supports for these young men in our program to help them enter the profession in a healthy way, whether it be because they have a life coach that we offer them, or a therapist that they get, or a stipend that they get for the duration of the residency, or it's housing at a reduced rate that they get access to. And so it's all these things that we have been thinking about through research that we've seen, or through feedback and experiences that fellows themselves have said, I wish I would have had this. And so,
Is it still, I know you said, talk about stipends, is it still a situation where they can, be enrolled in school, do their, residency, do the active, work in schools, but also get paid and still do their own jobs? Or how does the,
so it's different phases to the process with us. And so our program is a 2-year residency program with 3 phases. So the phase 1 is what we call foundations. That's the phase where you get all of the training that we offer, whether it's training in my wife's doctoral work of the components of care, which talks about what does it mean to be a caring educator and hold kids to high expectations, whether it's trauma-informed care for Black males, which focuses on the Black teacher themselves and the trauma that they've experienced in their own K-12 experience and helping them unpack that trauma so that they don't perpetuate it to their students like it was done to them, whether it's financial literacy, home buying, all those things. That's part of that process of helping them enter into the profession, in a healthy way.
Yeah, good. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, when I first heard about it, when we first connected, it was something I definitely needed to know more about, just because of just the Black advocacy in this world. When we talk about the levels of success that we can have, and seeing people that look like us in positions that we aspire to be, I feel like, there's a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
You see TV, television, celebrities, you ask a child what they want to be when they grow up. Not many say teachers. And I know specifically in the teacher space, my mother's an educator as well. And I've seen over the course of time, and of course, me going through my own education experience, through elementary all the way through college, seeing teachers and knowing some individuals become teachers. And it's like, you're in the classroom? You're like, talk about how, being prepared and I guess the overall system of putting the qualified teachers in the classroom for our Black and brown students, and specifically, the male, teacher population.
Yeah, so I think when we think about being prepared and having highly qualified teachers in front of students, and not just Black students or brown students, but all students for that matter, we want qualified educators teaching kids. That's just the foundation, the baseline that we start from. But when we think about Black educators, I think we can't have this conversation and understand it until we go back to how did we get here? And so when we think about how we got here, it was over 50 years ago, in 1954, when the decision of Brown versus the Board of Education, right, with the desegregation of schools. And what we know is that although it was legislation and law that supposed to be positive, which, in part it was positive, but it had unintended consequences. And part of those unintended consequences is that it gutted the Black teacher pipeline. So you had a lot of Black educators, because during that time, that was the profession that a lot of Black people went into. They were highly qualified. They went into teaching. They had their certification as degrees. You had Black students in Black schools, Black teachers. Education, was happening. Resources weren't equitable, but they were still getting it done. Well, when Brown v. Board happened, all the Black teachers got shipped out of the schools and sent to, schools more affluent areas, and white teachers who were in those more affluent areas got put into, schools where, a majority of Black students were. And so you went from having representation and having Black educators in front of you to now having educators who had no idea of the cultural context of the students. And so when those Black teachers got shipped out, those schools where they got shipped to were terrorizing them. And so they ended up quitting. It was like, I'm not going to this school, and these folks are protesting my Black body at this school, right? And then you had you had teachers quitting, teachers being fired, evaluations not being done right. Then you had administrators who were losing their jobs because they started closing schools, and so now you have administrators who were principals of schools that have majority Black students now don't have jobs. So now you have this decrease in Black educators in the pipeline. And so now we are 50 years later, and that's how we got where we are. And so when we talk about educators being prepared, well, when we look at the schools today that have concentrations of Black and brown students, those students oftentimes get the inexperienced not fully credentialed teacher.
Mm.
And the educators who do have experience and have their credentials and who are highly effective oftentimes are on what we say the other side of the tracks,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's this perpetual cycle of low student achievement, teacher burnout, lack of resources
Mm.
that are all at play of why we have what we have today. And so
Yeah.
we really want to tell an alternative narrative and really buck up against that system that's doing everybody wrong,
Yeah.
in that way.
And as well, I know we talked about home ownership, and you mentioned if you're interested in home ownership, and I know a
Mhm.
part of your, program is getting, your educators making sure that they become homeowners,
Mhm.
and not necessarily just homeowners, but homeowners in the cities,
Mhm.
in the areas, and where they teach. How important is it to understand the dynamics of the students in which you teach, being in that area? And specifically, being able to translate that and go to school and be effective. Because I
Yeah.
think relativity is large, right? I have to be able to connect with you, or at
Mhm.
least relate, or at least understand your situation to
Mhm.
be able to teach you, or just have a relationship with you. Because that's ultimately, it's still a relationship,
Mhm.
student teacher
Mhm.
relationship, and we have to nurture those relationships by first acknowledging, the background. So
Yeah.
how important is that? How does that play a part, or even become a part of the teacher
Yeah. I
village?
think it's the bedrock of our program.
Mm.
There's a phrase that said, "You can't be what you can't see, or what you don't see."
Mm.
So if you don't see Black educators, why would you want to be an educator?
Yeah.
Because if your experience in school is with teachers who don't look like you and then who over discipline you,
Yeah.
why would you want to come back to a school system? Why would you want to be a teacher? And so being able to have Black educators who live in the communities where they teach, it makes a big difference being in a grocery store and the students seeing the teacher outside of the classroom setting, be like, "Whoa, wait, that's Mister So and So," and the teacher, seeing their student, it builds a different type of student teacher relationship and understanding of that community, what that kid is dealing with, because whatever helicopters are keeping the students up at night are the same helicopters that's probably keeping the teacher up at night.
Yeah.
So when they get to school and they see the student is tired, they have a better understanding of why that student might be tired in class that day, and it's not translated as them being lazy
Mhm.
or them being unmotivated about learning because there were some other dynamics that were going on that they are dealing with even before they got into your
Yeah.
classroom. And I think the last thing is I think the kind of undercurrents of what we do I would just say on the spiritual end, is being incarnational. Like, what does it mean to live with and amongst the people who you serve?
Mhm.
And so when we think about it from a gospel perspective,
Mm.
it's Jesus coming down and living amongst the people and tabernacling with them to identify with their pain and their hurt and their dreams. And that's what we are asking our educators to do, is to come from college. You might been at Cornell University, you might have been at Morehouse, you might have been wherever, but we want you to come back to the city, come back to the hood, if you will, and we want you to live amongst the people so that you can identify with the hurts, the pains, and the dreams that they have as well.
So I'd almost say it's like, it's kind of like, putting drugs in the Black community
Mhm.
and what that does to them, and in terms of to us, in terms of historically speaking, and then on top of that, putting uneducated or unqualified, teachers in schools. And it's like, well, what do you expect to happen? So you can imagine, and maybe from your experience being in the classroom, is there a lot of frustration going on with, the students who deal with what they're dealing with coming into school, the teachers who may think, they may not even know that they're unprepared,
Mhm.
or just that kind of chaos, mentally and physically, that gets exerted, or plays itself out in the classroom and in the school system.
Yeah, I think it has everything to do with the model of education, the way in which our country is constructed around capitalism and hierarchies, and all those old models. And so when you have a construction of a country like that, you have a school system that's set up like that as well. And so when we think about in terms of business, the whole idea of supply and demand,
Mm.
right? There's this demand for educators in schools,
Yeah.
and there's this lack of supply that we have.
Yeah.
And so when we can get our hands on the supply, we try and fill those spaces where the demand is. Well, oftentimes the supply, the teacher, are unprepared,
Mm.
but they need bodies in the classroom because they need an adult
So they
in the
still
class for
fill
the
it.
kids.
Yeah.
So the school district is trying to themselves as a school system trying to fill spaces that are empty
Mm.
with in classrooms where there are kids.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the earlier discussion, oftentimes it's schools that have majority population of Black and brown students.
Yeah.
So you end up getting these folks who have a true desire of a career in education because they had an impact of a teacher. They may have a family of educators, and that's part of their legacy. And
Yeah.
they want to teach. They want to pour into the minds of young people, and they want to do it and take their time and all that kind of stuff. But the demand for the supply
Yeah.
is always at play.
Yeah.
And so you have that happening. Then you have just the economics.
Mm.
I'm fresh out of college. I need a job. I got student loans. I'm looking for something to do. This business degree that I got is not translated into work. I coach football, or I might be a mentor. Somebody said, you'll be a good teacher. And I didn't think about it, but now I'm thinking about it. And so let me go see what this is all about.
Yeah.
And I have a great heart for what I want to do. I'm unprepared. And guess what? There's this opening, and the principal said, oh, you're a
need
Black
that.
male.
Yeah.
And you're a Black educator. This got Black kids over here. Here, you can be in this classroom.
Right.
And so, as a young educator, you're like, oh, I can get paid.
Yeah.
I know it's not a lot of salary, but it's more than what I was making.
Right.
Right. And so supply and demand is what's at play, really.
Yeah, understood. And we talk about systems a lot, right? I mean, everything is a system,
Mhm.
right? It's cyclic, and if you don't correct the system or you don't challenge the system,
Mhm.
how can we be better? So when we talk about our education, right, and just the education system, I mean, I did a research project, I think maybe freshman year of
Mhm.
college, on the Finnish education system. So that's in Finland, and they study for mastery. Like
Mhm.
you can't even facilitate your own classroom until you get a master's degree.
Mhm.
They're not studying just to regurgitate information.
Right.
They're studying to actually understand, right?
Mhm.
Understand, master. And so when we talk about the education system, one, yes, we're trying to get male Black educators in the classroom, but we're also sending them to school. Is there an opportunity, and what opportunities are there for us to kind of correct the way in which we teach? Because right now it seems that the education system is just set up for us to become workers.
Yeah.
We're teaching people how to be trained
Mhm.
in a system to do as told
Mhm.
and become workers. And you have this friction between now, all the younger demographic is like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
Now I don't want to do this anymore. Not really knowing what being an entrepreneur entails,
Right.
but also coming from a systematic system, which is not kind of teaching you and sculpting you to develop large, macro skills. It's just micro focused on do as you say, do as you're told. I'm going to give you a limitation on what you can achieve. So I know I said a lot, but if you can kind of break that down into what your thoughts are or even experiences are, and to how we can kind of disrupt that system for our Black educators and educators alike.
Yeah. So, systems are made up of people, right? People make up systems, and people are broken.
Mm.
And so what we end up doing is creating broken systems, right? And systems that need to be redeemed, systems that need to be disrupted, dismantled, rebuilt, deconstructed, decolonized, all the buzzwords of the woke era. Right? And so, but when we think about our education system in America, this education system hasn't changed for centuries.
Yeah.
Right? when the education system was set up during the Enlightenment period in the 19th century, we're moving into the 21st century and we're still doing the exact same model of things. You know, educational system was set up during the agrarian period where it was about farm work and factory work. The reason why we had summer break wasn't because people were tired and during the summer, it was because it was time to harvest. So you were sending kids out for the harvest and the farming. So it was all based on seasons. And so that's how the education system is initially set up. And so if you have a factory model, that means you have to move people along on this continuum.
Yeah.
And so when you talked about Finland and their education system teaching for mastery, it's not a factory move along on a timeline. It's you don't move on until you've mastered this topic, then you move to the next.
Yeah.
So no matter how old you are, no matter what grade you're in, it's about mastery. And so I know that in our country, there have been folks who have looked and studied Finland's education system. And when you look at some of the schools around the country, there are schools that are trying to adopt these kinds of models around mastery-based teaching, mastery-based grading, with the new technology, with some of the ways in which innovation has happened with online learning and mastery-based learning with online learning and modules and on-demand kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's been some, incorporation of that, but all of that is just tinkering around the edge. And we take forever to change a system when we're tinkering around the edge versus just going at the heart of it and dismantling it to build something better that's more liberatory, where kids can think critically and consciously about their lives and the world that they live in.
Yeah.
And so currently we don't teach kids to think critically. We teach kids to be regurgitators of information.
Mhm.
That's why people hate history class,
Yeah.
right? Because history class is all about facts and figures.
Mm.
And what year did the Mexican-American War happen? When was the Civil War? Who were the players in it? What, just all that was just rote memorization versus saying, hey, let's look at history and tell it as a story, and then let's think critically about all these different events that happened throughout history. Why did this war happen? What led up to it? What could have been different? Things like that. And then thinking about today's context and today's world they live in and say, and today, let's look at the impact of history and what it's had on our lives today. Right. And so those are the types of ways in which education should be happening, but it's not happening because of whether it's testing at the end of the year. We got to make sure that they understand these standards, because at the end of the year, there's going to be this statewide test, and we want to make sure our scores are good because we don't want the media to be reporting about how bad our schools are, and I don't want a D- on our school, and all these things. So we never get to truly have kids engage in the learning process. We're having kids memorize stuff to be ready for a test at the end of the year.
Yeah. And
which, sorry to cut you off, which absolutely means nothing, because when you go to college, they're not asking about some standardized tests when you do your application.
Yeah.
Now they aren't even asking about your SAT scores anymore, right? And so it's all a hustle in the game to create workers and owners. And so when you think about today's education system, there's this new buzzword around workforce development. There's since the pandemic, there's this whole idea about the trades. Getting kids to go to trade school, college debt. Don't go to college. You can go to a trade school, get a trade degree, and you can start working right away. And so there's nothing wrong with the trades. I think that everybody should be eligible for college. Doesn't mean everybody want to go, but they all should be eligible to make their own decisions. Because there's nothing wrong with being a plumber, electrician, and all that, because we need those folks. I call those folks because I don't have expertise in that. But it just seems to me that there's more talk to lower income students about trades than it is about college. And that creates workers versus owners. So I'm not teaching you to be an entrepreneur. I'm not teaching you to be a leader, to be a CEO. I'm teaching you how to work for somebody for the rest of your life.
And not be able to see what it is that you really want. And I think that's another thing. Of course, economics plays a big role, especially, in that community of individuals. Like you said, we stated back then, I graduate, whether it's high school or college. Can I afford to go to college? I graduate college. All right, what am I looking at now? And so, I think that dynamic of, and what you're doing in this community is kind of, and it is an example of more systems that we need to help correct what already exists. And you know, you talked about your wife, right? You talked about your wife and her role. Let's kind of speak on that a little bit more and how, you know, she is able to assist you and how you are able to work together. So a little bit, you're married, right? You have children, again, grandchildren. We could talk about that a little bit first. You know?
Yep. So, been married for 30 years, together for 32 years. We have 3 young adult children, all who've graduated from college, who are all in teaching now, 2 grandchildren. One's 3, the other's like 4 months or something like that.
Yeah.
Wife and I have been in education for the past 28, 29 years together. She went into teaching before I did. She convinced me to go into teaching after her, and I did. And it was the best decision I made in my life. And so when we started this organization back in 2017, we started this organization because we wanted to make an impact on students in our community. And so we were looking at foster youth and families and wanting to provide supports for them in the education in schools. And that was the kind of the origin story of our organization. And so she went to school and got her doctorate from LMU and did research on care and what does the ethic of care look like for students in specialized populations, meaning non-public schools, Black males, and how do we engage Black males in the learning process. And in her research, she discovered it had to be about care and what care looks like and what care means. And when we talk about care, we're not talking about being squishy and, back in the day, romper roomy kind of stuff, but we're talking about what does it mean for an educator to authentically care about the education of kids. Because you can go through a whole credential program and become a teacher because you know how to pass the teacher licensing exam. But on all those exams, there's never, ever one question that asks you, do you like kids? And you think, well, of course, teachers like, if you go into education, you like kids.
Yeah.
Well, I can guarantee you, people who are watching this can think about a time in their K-12 experience where they had a teacher that's like, I really don't think that teacher liked kids.
Yeah.
They should not be in front of the classroom, right? And so she developed this training that we do in our organization. We train our fellows and we train other educators in LA. It's a college course at the university now, and it's called The Components of Care, looking at what does care look like in the classroom, for students and teachers.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about relationships, we talk about care, we talk about support systems, we talk about a system, and that's seems to be and is. Would you agree that is a huge component of your success with Teacher Village, having a partner, not even just a partner, it happens to be your wife, to be able to support one another and build this foundation? Would you agree that that's...
Yeah, it's a business decision, right? we work together because it's a business decision we make, right? So if I get better, she gets better. She gets better, I get better. Our organization gets better, and it helps us to continually to be independent of the system that churns people and burns them out. And so we know what our strengths are. We know our lane. I can do what she can't do, and she can do what I can't do. You know, and so we work in our strengths and complement one another in that work.
Yeah, and completely separate from work, and Teacher Village. I think it's important that we acknowledge the relationships that we have at home. We acknowledge the relationships that we have with ourselves as Black men, and how we how we show ourselves to our women. And so, could you speak on that and the importance of, being a man in the household, being the man of your household, nurturing that relationship just as much, even if you weren't, business partners, and how that plays a part into, who you get to be, how you show up, and what Peter Watts stands for.
Yep. I think Where's the camera? I'm gonna look at the camera. The sexiest thing you can do as a black man is to get you a therapist. All right, so women love healed black men, right? And so when we think about me as a father and a husband, apart from the work that I do, because my identity is not in the work I do, my identity is in who I've been created to be, as a person, as a human being. And so having a therapist and doing therapy has allowed me to think about my life as a whole and to be healed from previous traumas from growing up without a father or and being in toxic situations throughout my life, to be able to show up as a great father and a great husband, and to understand my kids and their experience, and not to perpetuate even some of the stuff that happened to me when I was growing up, and to ensure that there's always this open communication in my marriage and my relationship, which is why we're 30 years strong. And so when we talk about me as a husband and as a father, that is I think that's been one of the key factors to me being holistically healed, as a man, as a black man.
Thank you for that. I mean, what are some of the difficulties that come with that? Because I mean, I know you're at home with your wife, you work with your wife. Does that create some type of possible friction to where you're able to or need to find an outlet or do something different? How do you maintain peace? Because I mean, for myself in general, even without a significant other, I like my own space, right? Or for example, you talk about even your fellows or black teachers living in the communities in which they work. Well, I know some people, when I get off, I don't want to go to the grocery store and see Mike or Marvin. I don't want to see those kids. So, not that, there's anything wrong, but I need my time. How does that, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think it's all about rhythms and of life is what I call it. In the spiritual direction world, they call it the rule of life. Like, what is your rhythm? What is your rule when it comes to your life's rhythms? And so for me, it's understanding that every week I do Sabbath from Sunday noon to Monday noon, meaning that I get to do whatever it is I want without any expectation or demands on my life. That's my Sabbath. That's my work, rest kind of rhythm. I work hard, I play hard, right? And then every month, I do every last Monday of the month, I spend time from the time I get up to 12 noon to just reflect and meditate and journal and think about my life and things that I've dealt with in that previous month, and then the plan for the next month. So I plan my calendar out for the next month, put things on the calendar to protect my time. And then once a year, I do vacation somewhere, with my wife. We go out. Oftentimes we go to Jamaica or Dominican Republic or whatever the case may be, but it's away time with us to reconnect from the whole year of things. And so these are the rhythms that I've built into my life on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly basis. And so when you ask the question about like, how do I find that time? I schedule that time, and I'm intentional about that time so that I protect my time so that other people's expectations and demands are not forcing me to meet their demands, but it's on my schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said something that's really big, and it's intentionality. I know, being a young, entrepreneur-minded, still working corporate space, I had the tendency to try to do everything, right? Do everything all at once. And it took up so much of my time, I wasn't in control of my time. And then when I started to write down what I was doing, I didn't have enough time in a day. And so, saying no to others and saying yes to you, or as one of my mentors would like to say, it's no disrespect to you, but the ultimate respect for myself. Finding that discernment and that intentionality with saying, okay, I'm going to do this at this time. I'm going to schedule my life a certain type of way so that I'm successful. Because, for us, if we're empty, we can't, pour into somebody else if we don't have, what we need. So that's definitely important, for us. And I think, the pressures I talk to, other guests about, the pressures of being a black man and taking that on, and you kind of answer that as therapy has helped you prevail and overcome some of those obstacles, maybe mentally and physically, to be able to be there and support. Because, you know, going back to you being a leader of a fellowship, a leader of an organization, it's important for somebody like myself or somebody who, you know, looks up to you, or somebody even from the outside to look and see a strong leader. But understanding how we got there is not always talked about or exposed. I want to talk about grace. You know, grace in our life is very important. You know, God gives us grace. He grants us mercies every day. But we're not as, you know, gracious to one another. I know for me and my experience, you know, I've been very harsh. I've been very critical, and specifically the ones that I love the most, right? I think that that's the times where we kind of don't let up, because we're so familiar with these individuals. We want to see them be great. But talk about how important it is, you know, when you have being a teacher, being an educator, and being a facilitator within your organization, to give grace for those who come in so that they can give grace to those that they're going to affect in the community.
Yeah, I think grace is important. We don't get what we deserve, but we are afforded the opportunities and the blessings based on not on our own efforts, but because of God's gift of grace.
Yeah.
And so because of that, we should be gracious towards, you know, other people, to one another. And oftentimes, like you said, the people who we love the most, oftentimes we give less grace to. And so I think it's just being conscious, you know, of that. And so when I think about the work that I do with our organization and with the fellows, I'm always thinking about like grace as they are matriculating through our program and coming up against different barriers and challenges that I think might be minor. And they are feeling is major. Me being able to step back and be like, man, I need to give them grace because I don't understand their situation completely, even though I think I might. But then there are times when I will have to push. But knowing how hard to push and when to back up and when to give grace when mistakes are made, just because I would want that afforded that same, you know, opportunity.
Yeah, specifically in the classroom, when they do transition from, you know, the fellowship and get in the classroom, you have those the challenging behavioral kids, right? You have the kids that come to school, the kids that skip school, the kids that talk crazy to you. You know, there's no real, in a way, I guess, preparation for that. And correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, those are situational things. Those are obviously taking your prior knowledge and your experience to be able to effectively, you know, deal with those situations. But, you know, ultimately, you know, that's a right there, right one off type of thing. And so how do you kind of prepare to the best of your ability your fellows to deal, you know, and handle and manage those relationships with their students in the classroom?
Yeah, that's what the whole first year is about in our program. It's talking about those instances and situations that they are going to come up against inevitably. And that's why we train on the components of care. That's what care is. It's grace, right? And that's why we train on trauma-informed learning, so that when something traumatic happens, you don't respond in the same trauma, you know, with students, and that you actually gain a more deeper understanding of what's happening with them to get to know them as a full human being and not just as a number or statistic in the class. So, so we do prepare our fellows, you know, in our program in that first year to engage and when they encounter those situations. And so it is teaching, care is teaching them to be graceful.
You know, and throughout, you know, our life and the Black experience specifically, you know, being Black man, and for me, I've seen it more now, being into a space and being a connector and being one to bring businesses together. You know, I do a Black Business Showcase every year, and there's challenges within that. There's challenges with how we do business, our urgency, our sense of care to our own brand and other people's time. And I think that that's just all a symptom of our lack, for lack of a better term, or ability to be one, right?
Mhm.
The divisiveness that's been created, whether it's just our environment, the competition that goes on with one another. I'm trying to one up you instead of working together. And you've created something called the teacher's village, right? And that's because it takes a village. So speak on the importance of to being able to disrupt divisiveness and build one another. Because it takes a village to do everything: raise a child, your organization, just to be.
Mhm.
It takes more than one. So speak on that.
Yeah, I think I would first start by saying Black people are not a monolith,
Mm.
and Black people are no different than any other ethnic group or culture
Mm.
in this world. Meaning that uh, Black people are not the only one who disagree with one another and who don't work together,
Yeah.
just like any other community. And so, one, that's where I'll start with. Secondly, I'll say like Malcolm X said, "Who told you to hate yourself?"
Mm.
Right? And so I am always the one to blame Black people last for the problems that Black people have.
Okay.
And because of the context in which we were birthed in this country,
Yeah.
and the amount of trauma through enslavement, through Jim Crow, through laws in this country that were specifically and today that are specifically targeted towards Black bodies.
Yeah.
And so when you don't understand the cultural context and history around the Black American experience, that trauma that you see as a result of it can seem like culture, like it's just Black culture,
Yeah.
when really it's just a trauma response of Black people.
Okay.
And so when you think about the what appears to be a lack of working together, or a lack of distrust, or violence, the things that seem like it's pathological, that's just inbred and born in Black people.
Yeah.
I blame Black people last for it, because all it is a trauma response
Yeah.
that has not been dealt with, throughout the years, and redress that
Yeah.
needs to happen through reparations to make people whole.
Yeah.
Right. So I always start with that context. And, when we think about the African proverb of "it takes a village to raise a child," yes, indeed, we can't do this work alone.
Yeah.
We have to lean on other people to help us do that work.
Yeah.
Whether it's other businesses, other nonprofits, other donors, folks that don't look like us, folks that do look like us. And so we know that in order to raise up children and in order to raise up the future Black educators, we need the whole village. And that village can look like people that look like me, or it can look like people that don't look like me. I'll give you an example. We have a fellow in our program who fell on hard times, who needed to pay for classes in order to finish our program. And I was in conversation with a white guy who has a big heart, and just in conversation, just talking about the fellowship, and he was like, "Dude, I want to help. Can I write you a check for his debt?" Yes, you can, right? And so now he's part of our village,
Yeah.
right? And so I say all that to say that again, who told you to hate yourself?
Yeah.
There are forces out there that tell Black people that you shouldn't trust other Black people. There are forces out there that tell you shouldn't patronize other Black businesses,
Yeah.
because they know I go to this Black business, their services, da da da. But you'll go to a cheesecake factory and their service will be trash, but you'll still go back.
Yeah.
And so again, who told you to hate yourself,
Yeah.
right? And the reality, and I'll say again, lastly, the reality is that you go to the continent of Africa. I don't know why people have this false sense of illusion that all the tribes in Africa get along. They're tribes for a reason. They don't speak the same languages for a reason. They war with one another for a reason. So it's not like the Africans on the African continent in different tribes are all working together.
Yeah.
right? And so I just want to like dispel that kind of myth around Black folks and businesses and not working together. There is some jealousy, but I think that's just general human brokenness. But it has nothing to do with being Black, right? So yeah.
Okay. Hey, that's definitely a different perspective. You know, having this conversation a lot. I know that although we have past traumas, although we come from, you know, a culture of it, and it being kind of put on us, I do still challenge us. I challenge us daily to be able to see that, accept that, understand that. No one's coming to save us, even if we don't get the reparations. It's still up to one another to look at each other and say, hey, we're not gonna fight. You know, we should not be. We shouldn't create this much friction between one another. And I think that, you know, what you've created here is a village of empowerment, a village of togetherness, a village of support. And I thank you for your commitment to service, being a servant leader. Ultimately appreciate your time for coming on today, because it's something that I think is valuable and people are going to resonate with. So thank you, Dr. Watts.
Thank you. For sure.
Yeah.
Glad to be here and glad that you came out to talk to us.
Most definitely. Thank you.
Yep.
I'm counting blessings more than people counting sheep in they sleep. And they don't make it where I'm from, and I'm so thankful it's me.